Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel, or hello if you're new here today. I just want to quickly address first, thank you so much to my subscribers or my regular viewers for being so patient with me. You may or may not be aware that I haven't uploaded a YouTube video for the past 2 months, I think it was. So I'm so sorry about that, and I can definitely confirm in 2022 there will be more content coming up. After I settled into my new home that I'm currently in now, my computer just decided to die. It just completely turned off, and obviously I had no way to import videos or edit my YouTube videos or upload any videos or content, hence why I've been a little bit absent. I was also busy wrapping things up at the end of the year for my full-time job that I work, and then we went away for Christmas up to far north Queensland. So I've just returned, I've got a new device, so now I can upload more content for you guys on YouTube, which is great. I've also noticed that I've got a few new subscribers, which is so incredible to me. Thank you so much for joining. And I hope everybody had an amazing Christmas and is starting their new year off really great. Okay, so let's just get on into the video. I just want to make my quick disclaimer. This video is a true crime case, and today's themes involve crimes against children, so please watch at your own risk. I'm in no way a professional. I don't work in any areas of crime investigation or law. I just simply like to review and talk about different crime cases from all over the world, and all this information is from online sources that are available to you guys and the general public. Please forgive me if I accidentally miss or get any information wrong in this video. I definitely don't do it on purpose, and I just try and make these videos as best I can with what the internet provides me. So in today's video, we will be covering the case of Elisa Izquierdo, or as some people I think like to call the case, the modern Cinderella case. So Elisa Izquierdo was a little 6-year-old girl born on the 11th of February 1989 in Brooklyn, New York. Now, when Elisa was born, her father Gustavo actually received full custody of her. Gustavo was a Cuban immigrant who had aspirations of becoming a dance instructor or a teacher, but for now he worked as a chef and a caretaker at a homeless shelter. From everything that I read online, it was said that Gustavo was just a really great guy, and he was an absolute doting father on Elisa. She was his little princess, and he wanted everything in the world for her, and he did his best to raise her, even though he was a single dad on his own. The reason that Gustavo had full custody of Elisa from the moment she was born was because Elisa's mother, Awilda Lopez, was a drug addict, and she was addicted to crack cocaine in particular. Gustavo and Awilda actually met at a homeless shelter that Gustavo was working at, because Awilda often frequented shelters because she had been kicked out of her apartment for not paying her rent. And I'm assuming she wasn't paying her rent because the money was most likely going to drugs. Awilda actually shared this rental apartment with an old partner that she had 2 children with, but they ended up splitting up, and she was kicked out of her tenancy. And on top of this, due to her excessive drug use, these children were actually taken off her, so she no longer had custody of them. And I believe these 2 children went to live with one of Awilda's family members, like an aunt or an uncle. At this time, as I said before, Awilda was frequenting different homeless shelters, and that is where she met Gustavo, and they briefly started to see each other. However, when Gustavo realized that Awilda was a frequent user of crack cocaine, he actually backed out of the relationship. He was like, that is not a bit of me. However, it was at this moment that Awilda discovered she was pregnant with little Elisa, and unfortunately, she still continued to use crack cocaine while she was pregnant with her. When Elisa was born, she herself was actually already addicted to crack cocaine, which is just an awful way to start out your life as a baby infant, all because of her mother's drug use while she was pregnant with her. Full custody of Elisa was then granted to her father Gustavo, because Awilda was in no state to raise a child safely and healthily. So from there on, Gustavo raised Elisa alone as a single dad. As I said, Gustavo was said to have just been such a great dad. Although he had no parenting experience before this, he just did the best he could. He absolutely adored his little girl. He went to parenting classes. He asked people for advice. He had celebrations for her birthdays, had her baptized at age 4, which came as a huge celebration as well. Gustavo then enrolled his daughter Elisa in preschool because he thought it was very important that she had an education ahead of her, but unfortunately he was having trouble paying these school fees because he did have a medical condition, made him have a lot of doctor's appointments which come at a cost. As we know, he was only a single father working part-time. However, Elisa showed real potential at the school she was at, and the teachers could see how hard Gustavo was trying to give his daughter the best opportunities. So these teachers and the principal of the school actually introduced little Elisa and her father Gustavo to one of the school's patrons, which was Prince Michael of Greece. After this meeting and spending all day with Elisa and her father, this Prince of Greece actually offered to pay Elisa's school tuition all the way to 12th grade, which they were absolutely ecstatic about. Elisa and Gustavo were just incredibly grateful to the Prince of Greece for giving them this opportunity, and Elisa wrote a letter of gratitude to him, telling him thank you so much, and often kept in contact. So Elisa was set up for an education all the way to her 12th grade studies, which was incredible and such a weight off Gustavo's shoulders. So everything seemed to be really working out for the father-daughter duo. But of course, as we know in these stories, something was brewing on the outside. Elisa's mother, Awilda Lopez, was trying to creep her way back into this picture. Awilda was said to have 1, beaten her drug addiction to crack cocaine, and 2, found permanent housing in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, as opposed to being in and out of homeless shelters. And number 3, she had just married a new guy, Carlos Lopez, who was a maintenance worker, and they were actually expecting a baby together. So this was Awilda's 4th child. Her 2 children previously had been taken off her, and also Elisa had been taken off her as well. So this was baby number 4. Now in December of 1990, Awilda gave birth to her child with Carlos Lopez, a little baby girl, and she actually regained custody of her 2 eldest children from her first guy. Then in 1991, Awilda was actually granted some custody of Elisa as well, and it wasn't full custody, it wasn't even half custody. Awilda was granted the right to see Elisa unsupervised every second weekend, because I guess on paper to the judge, it looked like Awilda Lopez was getting her life back together. She'd beaten the drug, she's got some more secure housing to have the children in. She's married to a new guy. She's gotten custody of her other children back. It seemed as though on paper things were getting better and Awilda was making better choices in her life. Now, I have no idea what Gustavo felt about this new court decision, whether he was happy for his daughter Elisa to have a relationship with her mum, or whether he was worried and resistant about this decision. Due to the court granting Awilda the right to see her daughter Elisa, he didn't really have much choice. I'm sure Gustavo would have had some doubt or worry internally about letting his little princess into the arms of someone with a track record like Awilda. Of course, people make mistakes in their lives. Some people make big mistakes and big regrets, and it's great when they want to try and do better in their future. But at the same time, I feel like there probably was a massive trust loss between Gustavo and Awilda, so I could understand if he was very hesitant to let Elisa go. So now Elisa started spending time with her mother Awilda and stepfather Carlos. When Elisa would return from her mother Awilda's house, her father actually noticed a lot of bruises on her body, and teachers at school actually started noticing bruises on Elisa's body too. Now, I believe it wasn't that long after Elisa started spending time with her mother that the 2 eldest children, so Awilda's 2 first children, started telling family relatives that Elisa was being abused by their mother Awilda and Carlos. They told their relatives that Elisa was beaten often and was just generally neglected by her mum and stepfather. Now, these relatives did nothing. They said nothing to anybody, whether that was because they didn't believe the two older kids or they didn't want to have that uncomfortable conversation with Awilda. I don't know, but unfortunately they didn't say a word to anybody or report it. Sorry, this part of the film just somehow got lost, so I just wanted to add it in here. But around this time, there had been an incident in the Lopez household. Carlos Lopez actually got into an altercation after accusing his wife Awilda for seeing other men, allegedly. Carlos then actually pulled a knife and proceeded to stab his wife Awilda multiple times while she was breastfeeding her young child. After the situation, Carlos did some time in jail, and Awilda allegedly tried to cut ties with him. However, upon his release, it was said that Carlos went back to Awilda with a lot of vengeance and began taking his anger out on not only her but the stepchildren as well, including Elisa. Gustavo also noticed that Elisa had a lot of bruising to her lower regions and her private parts, and when he asked her, "Why do you have bruises in these areas?" she actually said that her mother had beaten her and locked her in closets. At this stage, Elisa actually expressed to her father that she did not want to go to her mother's house anymore and see her, and there was clearly some kind of fear and anxiety related to going and seeing her mother. Gustavo also noticed Elisa had begun bedwetting and didn't seem to have much control of her bowels. A family friend also mentioned Elisa seemed to vomit every time she would come back from her mother's house, and she would not go into bathrooms anymore. Gustavo also said Elisa would get nightmares when he would inform her that she was going to her mum's for the permitted weekends. So she didn't want to go and be with her mum or her stepfather. She was clearly in fear. So Gustavo and Elisa's teachers immediately went to authorities to report this apparent abuse that was going on in the home, and Elisa even told a social worker what was going on in her mother's home when she was there for permitted visits. So in 1992, Gustavo applied to regain full custody of his daughter Elisa and to have Awilda's rights just completely gone from seeing her again, but the courts, however, said no. They said, no, Awilda can continue to see Elisa just like it is now. However, we will put in like a clause or a condition saying that Awilda can no longer strike or otherwise harm Elisa. Like, what? Does that not tell you anything about the situation? If you have to write in a clause of a contract saying that Awilda cannot hit or strike or harm Elisa, her own daughter, does that not tell the judge and authorities that she obviously has the potential and can harm Elisa? You're letting the child back into her care. Just because a piece of paper says that she can't hit her daughter, that doesn't mean that she's not gonna do it. Can I ask how that's even monitored? Like, did they seriously think that the next time Awilda beat her daughter, she was gonna say, oh no, I broke my contract. Better call the judge. I broke the contract, yes. No, obviously she's not gonna do that. Anyway, it happened, so we'll move on. So in 1993, the following year, Elisa is now around 4 years old, and her father Gustavo had plans to completely relocate both of them to Cuba because I'm assuming he understood the severity of this abuse that poor Elisa was going through, and he just wanted to completely move her away from all that. He had already purchased airline tickets for the both of them, and they were set to jet off to Cuba on the 26th of May that year. And I'm sure Gustavo thought that this was going to be an absolutely amazing fresh start for the both of them. They could be happy and healthy together, get Elisa away from the horrible abuse that she was enduring, and she could just go back to being a happy little girl again, like she should be at 4 years old. Then, a complete tragedy happened, as if this little girl hadn't already been through enough in her short life. Gustavo was actually admitted to hospital due to lung cancer and respiratory complications, and unfortunately Gustavo ended up passing away on May 26th, which was the day him and Elisa were supposed to set off for Cuba to start their new life together, which is just horrible. I mean, Gustavo, everything I've read about him just says that he was such a loving father, a great citizen, just doted on his daughter. She was his world, and I'm sure he was to her as well. So now Elisa has lost her father, who had custody of her, so now somebody else is going to have to become her full-time parent. And as soon as Awilda heard of Gustavo's death, she went straight to the courthouse and applied for full permanent custody of Elisa. Now, she was not awarded full permanent custody of Elisa. She was awarded just temporary custody, which is still horrible for Elisa. I don't think Elisa, being a little 4-year-old girl, quite grasped the concept of what death was or what happened to her father exactly. So she actually asked her mother, Awilda, what had happened to her father, Gustavo, and allegedly Awilda just screamed to her that her father was dead. Just a horrible woman. In my opinion, it seems as though Awilda only wanted custody of Elisa to most likely get child support benefits, because it didn't seem like she actually loved or wanted Elisa in the home. I think it was just for monetary compensation, or whether it was something a bit more sinister, so her and her husband could abuse someone, a child. I have no idea, but obviously I don't think they wanted Elisa in the home for good intention. The director of Elisa's school and several other staff members that knew Elisa actually wrote letters to the judge working on her case, expressing grave concerns and fear for the child's well-being and safety if Awilda was to be granted permanent custody of Elisa, which I think was so good that they did that and they tried to step in and help. Gustavo's cousin, her name was Elisa Canizares, she actually heard the news that Awilda was granted temporary custody of Elisa, and she tried to step in herself, because I'm assuming Gustavo maybe had confided in her while he was alive and expressed all the things that had been going on behind closed doors about the abuse that Elisa was suffering at the hands of her mother and stepfather. So Elsa actually tried to gain custody of Elisa herself. Elsa went to court, she challenged Awilda, and she told the judge, look, I have documented abuse inflicted on Elisa from her time being in her mum's and stepfather's house. And we have all these letters from the school saying that custody should go to me or anyone else other than the mum. And even the Prince of Greece actually sided with Elsa and told the judge that even he requested that custody should go to Elsa. The Prince of Greece also told the judge that he would obviously continue paying the tuition for Elisa to complete her studies all the way up to 12th grade if the custody was granted to Elsa. So she's got the option of a better home and education for all her studies, or going back to an abusive environment. Unfortunately, because legal fees are like crazy expensive, Elsa didn't have any representation. She was just representing herself, but Awilda did. Awilda's legal team were sketchy as hell. They allegedly said that a social worker went to check up on Awilda while Elisa was in her care, and Elisa actually said that she wanted to live with her mum, which I say allegedly because I don't even know if that's true. Awilda's legal team then pointed the finger at Elsa, saying, you know, how dare you try and take this child away from her biological mother, just let her be with her family, and things like that, which is just so awful. Like, Elsa's trying to get this child out of this toxic and abusive environment, and they're just completely spinning it. So due to all this mess, the judge in 1994 granted full permanent custody to Awilda Lopez. So Elisa was now going to live with her mother full time. So now Elisa is living full time with her mother Awilda and her stepfather Carlos and her other siblings in the home. And it was actually at this time that the mother Awilda completely withdrew Elisa from her private school that the Prince of Greece was paying for and enrolled her in a Manhattan public school. From here, the abuse in the home on Elisa just got worse and worse, and I don't know if the other children endured any or as much abuse as Elisa, but Elisa seemed to be the main target for Awilda. The stepfather Carlos was also abusing Elisa, and he was, I believe, abusing the other two older children because he said, quote, "They weren't my children." At school, Elisa was noticed to be completely withdrawn. She was not communicating properly with anybody. She seemed to be very disturbed, and there was clear physical abuse inflicted on her. Elisa was said to urinate all the time. She walked with a limp or had a hard time walking in general, and always had bruises on her body. In March of 1995, an anonymous letter was actually posted to the Manhattan Child Welfare Authorities, and it stated in the letter that Awilda, Elisa's mother, had cut off all her hair and would lock her in closets in the dark for extensive periods of time. Around 6 days after this letter was sent, Elisa was admitted to hospital with a fractured shoulder, which had actually been fractured 3 days prior. So she'd been sitting with a fractured shoulder for 3 days before she got any treatment for it. Staff at the Manhattan Public School also went to welfare authorities or social services explaining their concerns for Elisa, but they said that there wasn't enough evidence to show she was being abused. Hair missing, walks with a limp, fractured shoulder, just to name a few. Teachers from Elisa's school actually went to her home address to check on her from time to time, and it was noted that when they went and did these quick visits that Awilda seemed to have gone back to her old ways and was using drugs again. She was on crack cocaine again with these children in the house. Awilda was getting really fed up and annoyed with all these random people turning up on her doorstep because they wanted to check on Elisa. So I believe in 1995, Awilda actually completely withdrew Elisa from school in general and didn't enroll her anywhere else, just so then no one would be able to check on her anymore and she wouldn't be seen by anyone. So now Elisa was just stuck in the home all day, every day with her abusive mother and stepfather. And as you can imagine, it just escalated and got worse and worse from there. Awilda started to lock Elisa in her bedroom in the dark all the time now, and she didn't let her brothers and sisters see her. So Elisa just was not being socialized and she wasn't allowed to go out of the apartment. Whilst Elisa was locked in her room, her mother Awilda wouldn't let her out to even use the bathroom. She would make her go to the toilet in a chamber pot which sat in her room. And I know chamber pots were used in the past, and I don't know if they're still used in some places of the world today, but there was, I'm fairly certain, a functioning toilet in the apartment that they all lived in. It was just more so that Awilda was abusing her daughter and wouldn't let her go to the functioning toilet. And I'm sure Awilda was not cleaning the chamber pot. She'd probably left it dirty in her room, which is unhealthy. It was more so making Elisa feel like she was a prisoner in her room by locking her in the dark and making her go to the toilet in her bedroom. During this time, some neighbors had reported hearing some kinds of child abuse going on in the home. They said that they could hear young children screaming and crying, and they could hear Elisa pleading with her mother to stop hitting her. Some of the neighbors did report this, however, no action was taken, but good on them for reporting it at least. Some neighbors were actually said to have known about the abuse that Awilda was inflicting on her daughter Elisa, and they admitted to not ever reporting it or saying anything, which I just don't understand. Like, why wouldn't you go and report it? What do you have to lose? Some neighbors said that they had heard Awilda refer to Elisa as, quote, a filthy little whore. Yeah, she's 6, a whore, okay. Awilda actually believed that Elisa had been put under a spell by her father Gustavo before he passed away, and that Elisa was actually possessed by the devil. And I'm sure we can all assume that Awilda's constant drug taking would have been affecting her mental state. Maybe that's why she thought this. Apparently, some of the extended family members, if they would ever come over to the home, would actually believe Awilda when she told them that Elisa was possessed by the devil. And that's why they never reported anything, because they felt like the neglect and the abuse was okay because she was possessed by the devil, which is just so bizarre. Surely they knew that Awilda was on crack. Later in the investigation, Awilda's 2 oldest children actually told authorities that they saw with their own eyes their mother forcing Elisa to eat her own feces and drink her own urine mixed with water. They also told authorities that Awilda would mop the floor with Elisa's hair and head, and that Elisa would often get burnt. I don't know with what exactly, but she would often have burns all over her head, all over her face, and on her lips. It was also said that Awilda dropped a chest of drawers on Elisa's fingers and toes, which caused broken bones. Carlos Lopez, the stepfather, would actually join in on this abuse of Elisa, and I'm fairly certain the other 2 older children that weren't his own children, and he was a frequent drug user as well, so him and Awilda were often not in the right state of mind. Elisa was also sexually abused and assaulted in multiple different ways at the hands of her own mother. I'm not going to get into the finer details of those occasions. It is all out there on the internet if you want to go do your own research. Just do it with care, of course. The other children in the house actually witnessed this. I don't know if they were forced to witness this or not. But either way, she was sexually assaulted at the hands of her own mother. Elisa would often be deprived of food, but then her mother, Awilda, would force her to sit at the table and watch everybody else eat dinner, for example. So she was being starved and having to watch everybody else eat, which is awful. So in November of 1995, Awilda was at home with her daughter Elisa, and her stepfather Carlos was actually not at the house. He was actually in prison for breaking some kind of rule on his parole. So it was just Awilda and Elisa at home. Awilda noticed that there was something wrong with Elisa. She was laying on the bed and she just looked really unwell. She just wasn't in a good way. Awilda then called her sister to tell her that there is something wrong with Elisa, and she explained the situation, and then she told her sister, and I quote, "Elisa is like retarded on the bed." And I mean, that clearly goes to show how much she cares about her daughter's well-being if she can describe her in that way while her health is failing her. Awilda then told her sister on the phone that there was some kind of fluid coming out of Elisa's nose and mouth, and it was actually later determined to be brain fluid. And Elisa at this point was not eating or drinking anything. Awilda's sister told her that she needed to call 911 immediately or get Elisa to a hospital ASAP. And Awilda's response was very nonchalant. She didn't really care. She sort of was like, oh, you know what, I'll leave her for a bit. I'll think about it after I've done the dishes. Awilda actually left Elisa like that in that state all night, and the following morning she was actually talking to a neighbor out the front of the apartment and invited the neighbor in to have a look at Elisa in this state. I'm not sure exactly how Awilda played it with the neighbor. I don't know if the neighbor was confused or if Awilda acted as if like, please come in and check on my daughter. I'm not sure what I should do, or if it was just like, do you want to come see Elisa? She's in her room. But when they walked in, it was clearly evident to anyone looking at Elisa that she was already deceased at this point. So Awilda, we're pretty sure, clearly knew that she was deceased as well, and even still invited this neighbor to come in and have a look at her daughter's dead body. Like, how sick. The neighbor, I think, was alarmed and said, you need to call authorities, an ambulance straight away, because I'm fairly certain your daughter is deceased. But Awilda refused to call 911. So the neighbor actually did it themselves. Awilda at this point was threatening to commit suicide, and finally the police and the ambulance show up. They take Elisa's body in for autopsy, and they take Awilda down to the police station for questioning. So when authorities were questioning Awilda down at the police station, she actually revealed to them that she had thrown Elisa into a solid concrete wall just 2 days prior, and after that moment she could no longer walk or talk properly. The autopsy of Elisa's body revealed the constant abuse that she had been enduring. She had broken fingers and toes, she had internal damage to her organs, and her private parts had evidence of trauma. She had burns and welts all over her body as well as her face. They'd found 30 circular marks all over her body, which were found to be from someone striking her who was wearing a ring, and the circular marks were from like the stone in the ring. It was determined that Elisa's cause of death was a brain hemorrhage that had been inflicted by her own mother. We are presuming it was from the concrete wall incident, since Elisa couldn't walk or talk or move properly after that. In November of 1995, a funeral was held for little Elisa, and it was officiated by a reverend who actually told everyone at the funeral that Elisa was killed by her mother. By the silence of many people and by the neglect of child welfare institutions. Elisa had an open casket, and they tried to cover up as much of the evidence of the abuse as best they could. She also wore a crown made of white flowers on her head, and she had a red rose flower in her hand, and her coffin was just covered with flowers and notes and toys. And one toy in particular she had with her in the casket was a Barbie doll that her dad had actually given to her. It was like her favorite toy. Once she was buried, her gravestone actually read, quote, "World, please watch over the children." When police questioned Awilda about the abuse, like why was Elisa being abused, Awilda said that she genuinely believed that Elisa was possessed by the devil and that she was just trying to rid the evil inside of Elisa. She then came back saying that she was actually coerced into saying that excuse, and it was actually her husband, Carlos Lopez, that beat Elisa to death that day. From my understanding, Carlos Lopez was in jail at the time. I know that he was put in jail 7 days prior to Elisa's death, but he could have been released after that time on bail or something. So if anyone knows to clear it up for me and everybody watching here now, that would be great, because I'm not sure if he was in jail or not. The court day came in June of 1996, and Awilda Lopez ended up pleading guilty to second-degree murder, which was actually a plea deal, which in exchange would give her 15 years to life in prison as opposed to 25 years to life if she had been convicted at trial by jury. It was said that Awilda was very emotional in the courtroom, and people think that the magnitude of this situation that she'd inflicted on her daughter had actually hit her. So then a month later, the judge sentenced Awilda Lopez to 15 years to life in prison, and she was eligible for parole in 2010. So just quickly flashing forward, she's actually still incarcerated in prison. She was denied parole in 2010 and 2020, and she's actually up for her next parole hearing in January 2022, which is where we sit right now. As for the stepfather, Carlos, he was actually sentenced to 1.5 to 3 years in prison, which would run consecutively with his prison sentence that he was serving at the time of Elisa's death. So after all this came out, obviously the public were completely outraged with the system because there was so many warning signs and opportunities for people to step in, and the judge that had allowed Awilda to gain custody of Elisa actually got a lot of hate. That particular judge that made that decision said that in her own defense, she was just doing her job and doing the legal procedures. And those legal procedures led her to that decision. Elisa's law then became a thing in 1996, and this was to enhance the requirement for increased accountability among welfare workers. As for the other children in the home, due to both the parents going to prison, they were actually sent to separate foster homes. So I'm not entirely sure where they are or what they're doing at this moment. However, I do know that all of them have acute psychological trauma from watching their parents inflict so much abuse physically, sexually, emotionally on their sister. I'm hoping that they are getting the help that they need right now. Authorities that actually worked on this case described it as being, quote, one of the worst cases of child abuse they have ever seen. So that actually brings us to the end of this video today. I know it was a really hard and probably upsetting one to listen to and talk about. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I'd love to discuss with you respectfully, of course. What do you guys think about the sentencing of the parents? Do you think they got enough years? I'm definitely relieved that Awilda did not get released in 2010, because I think that would have been a massive slap in the face to poor little Elisa. I will definitely keep an eye out on articles on Google, and I'll see maybe if it's even broadcasted here in Australian news whether Awilda gets granted parole in this month, 2022. So yeah, I'll add an update in any of my future videos if any advancements come from that. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you do want to see more true crime videos from me. Again, I hope you had a fantastic Christmas and a great start to your 2022, and I hope to see you guys in my next video. Bye!